morning, everyone. Excellent. There are two things happening today. I see that I'm speaking to you after your free McCafe coffee. The other thing, of course, is that I feel hugely disadvantaged. You can refer to me now as a previously disadvantaged speaker. The reason for that is that I'm not a mythical animal or a mythical beast of any kind. So between the dragons that we saw yesterday and the former Shark Tank people that spoke just now, I feel like I need an animal of sorts. My only problem is I'm not sure which one it should be. But, maybe I think we need to do like, I don't know, an antelope's safari or something. The dragon's den is taken, the Shark Tank is taken. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know. This morning, I'm greeting you thinking long and hard because I was told that I'm addressing captains of industry. Captains of industry. It was those that are and those that are in the making. And that's why I thought I'd greet you showing you a captain of industry behind me. This is Ursula Burns. She was the former CEO of a company called Xerox. Now, Xerox is a very interesting company because if you go to the States, one of the things that you learn immediately, excuse me, is that people don't photocopy. People literally Xerox. Like people don't perform an internet search, they Google. In the States, they Xerox. It's like in South Africa, jik. All bleach is jik. Sometimes people go out to buy ace jik, but jik is jik. It's one of those things. And it's interesting because this title of captain of industry was very interesting to me. I tried to look it up and find out why captain. Could be industry could be many things, but why does it need to be captained? And I was confused because was it a sporting captain? Was it a Sia Kolisi of sorts? Was it a naval captain? And it was very interesting because in trying to look for this, I thought that there were a number of things that I found were interesting. In the nautical places, the nautical spaces, found a number of things. Captains are in transition. Here, I want to draw your attention to the Admiral Zheng He. I hope I pronounced that well. I have many friends who speak Mandarin, including a member of our team who actually learned it in Taiwan. So if she's laughing, you know who she is. Admiral Zheng He was the admiral of a Chinese expedition. Chinese expedition, active mainly between 1405 and 1433, and he brought with him to the east coast of Africa, we believe somewhere around Mombasa, 28,000 people by sea. It's an interesting thing. 28,000 people just after 1400 traveling by sea is an astonishing achievement. This, you'll see his flagship ship. The small ship that you see next to it, can everyone see it? So there's a big ship, then there's a much smaller ship, is the ship that Christopher Columbus took on his famous voyage from Spain to the New World. It gives you a sense of scale. 200 ships all told. Then, a little later, just slightly later, 1492 or thereabouts, you'll see that this is the famous, or at least a portrait of who we believe is the famous Christopher Columbus. You'll see that he only took 3 ships. And that those 3 ships were much easier to manage, pilots of the other ships, Martin Pinzon and a guy by the name of Pedro Alonso Nino. And then today, this is the captain of the second largest container ship in the world. There is one called the OOL Hong Kong. The problem with me using that is I just don't know who the captain is. What we find in these 3 paradigms is that when you were a leader in a place where you have an entire fleet, where you have an entire flotilla, when you have a number of ships floating together, your job is slightly more complex than we see Captain Dick, I think it's Danielson, if I've got my Danish correct, has to contend with. See, when you're there are 3 things that you're trying to manage when you have a fleet of ships. The first one is the general direction. Okay, so that exists for everybody who's sailing. The second one is the interplay with the other ships. It's disastrous when you have 200 ships and they can't sail in formation well enough to to avoid collisions with each other. And then finally, you've got to think about each individual ship. So each individual ship must not have scurvy, must not be leaking, must have all of its sailing paraphernalia in good and working order. There are a lot of those things at an individual ship level. Then there is the interplay with the individual ships, with the fleet, and then there's the business of getting the entire fleet navigating on choppy water, unfamiliar terrain, going from, kind of Shanghai to Mombasa. Interestingly, today, most ship captains in this type of environment sail alone. Much less complex. But nevertheless, the transition is clear. It's an interesting transition. It's one that I want to revisit later because I think it's instructive for where we're about to go. One of the things that I want to share with you, of course, is that last night I was not spared from any technical difficulties. So if there are very interesting transitions on my slides, please bear with me. We'll be both surprised at once. And so I've done my best to recreate them without any discomfort for all those that are looking at them. What's interesting about the shipping analogy, though, is that shipping did a number of things for us. I think the majority of nautical innovation took place because people wanted to trade. Trade is an important thing, an important motivator. Not only, but it was a dominant driver. The second thing is that it was a key enabler. In fact, it was a catalyst to make globalization go faster. The ability to go between continents spurs an age of globalization that begins and accelerates, and one that we cannot reverse, even though the leader of the free world station, the White House at the moment, would like to reverse it ever so slightly. And then finally, in looking at organization, one of the things that we see is this interesting trend of continued centralization. And the centralization is one of those things that you can see. You can see in the sense that a single vessel now can carry across vast distances almost everything it requires to be a solo vessel. And it's an interesting analogy because it shows us something which is going to be interesting for where we're about to go. One of the things, though, that we're seeing is that things are no longer as certain. It doesn't feel as steady as it once was. And I mean, depending on which part of business you're in, so if you're in the tech space and you're in Silicon Valley and you put things in the cloud and you're trying to use artificial intelligence to make people better accountants, you might relate to the term disruption. Disruption is a nice technical term. But if you're in a corporate that's a little more traditional, doesn't talk too much disruption, maybe you like the term VUCA. VUCA is the official, I'm still a stable corporate, I don't speak tech language way of saying, the waters are choppy. The acronym stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In other words, it's stormy water. Not feeling quite as secure as I used to be. And it's an interesting thing because this uncertainty is one of the things that we're trying to navigate now, and it's visited upon us many times not because of our own choosing, because of a number of things. Many people have tried to kind of define these things, and there are two principal paradigms about this. Now, this is the part where I assume that all of you esteemed captains of industry are incredibly well versed in both the fourth and the third industrial revolution. I don't wish to do what I've seen in government circles all the time, where there is the obligatory mention of these words, and people who know lots about them need to sit through it. What is important, though, to realize that whichever paradigm you subscribe to, whether you're more inclined to look at it as a fourth industrial revolution, the way that the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab look at it, or you look at it as a third industrial revolution, the way Jeremy Rifkin brings it across, one of the keys that I want to pull out today is that however you look at it, and there are many differences, and this nuance I think is important, the thing is, this revolution is not going to be centralized. It's an interesting point in time. Two examples. One of the biggest monolithic business industries has been the provision of electricity. Power utilities are large. Our power utility is the 7th largest in the world by production. By generating capacity, our power utility is the 7th largest in the world. It's the 9th largest by sales. It is a truly large business. 177 billion rand in turnover. Even a small part of that business is a very large business. That centralization, though, is under threat. It used to be power. It used to be a source of power to have that type of scale and muscle. You could dictate so many things: pricing, industry, value chains. You could literally organize things around you. Except the biggest threat to power utilities comes from the fact that every single person sitting in this room can substantially now generate their own electricity. It would be much easier for them, much easier, if another monolith set up shop, because then you can go head to head, right? We know which consultants, we know which lawyers, we know which regulators, we know which lobby, we know which board of directors. We can deploy all of these advantages that built the centralized system, and we could wage war on a very, very, very comfortable basis, except that the fact that they don't know who these people are. Not sure how much they're generating, which solar panel are they installing, which heat pump are they using, which solar geyser. All of those things make the centralized power that businesses feel today, that they've been trying to get, and it's slipping between their fingers. We've seen it all through the internet age. We've seen the fact that there was a time when if you wanted to get some comment out into the public area, you would need to write to an editor. You'd take out your stationery, you'd write a letter, and you'd say, "Dear editor so-and-so, my perception of such and such an issue is that this will happen," and you would post it. The first amount of faith needed, of course, was that the post office would deliver it to the newspaper. The second one was that somebody was going to be diligent about the post, and the third one was that he was going to read enough letters to get to yours, and then he would publish yours. Highly, highly, highly centralized, very concentrated, which meant there was a few people deciding who got to comment, who got to say things. Now, of course, there are a lot of people, perhaps many in this room, who don't really care about having their letter published in the Star. In fact, they might not desire it. And they're already making all of the comments that they need to via social media on any point that they want to make. The interesting thing is that the enablers of that decentralized activity of everyone gets to comment are doing well. The people who used to have the centralized power are not experiencing life quite the same way. We good? So, this was very interesting for me. It was very interesting because there are a number of things that shipping was teaching us, and that there are a number of things that business now needs more than ever. And the things that we're looking for are being found in ever stranger places. The first thing is that all of our businesses want attention, they all want relevance, and they all want to provide value. If we get those three things right, we're doing well. If we have attention, everyone knows us. In marketing terms, it's reach, it is awareness, all of those wonderful good things. Relevance is the fact that you matter in someone's life, enough for them to choose you. And value, of course, is the fact that they're even happy to exchange something. Sometimes information, but often money in order to get your goods and services. Much of the things that we're seeing in attention, however, is that attention is being driven. And it's driven specifically more and more by people who are doing peer-to-peer communication. People are saying it via Facebook, they're driving it because they like it. But one of the things that we're seeing is that attention is getting more difficult to drive from the center. I'm not here to get into something about advertising, but there's a lot that's to be said about whether or not people believe it to the degree that they used to. There are some people who are being questioned and challenged because they decided to disseminate a centralized message. That attention is leaking because whatever a 30-second commercial, a full-page ad was, and hear me clearly, there is still lots of value in those things. It is no longer what it used to be in 1980. Attention is far more decentralized and democratic than it's ever been before. Accordingly, so is relevance. Because more and more people have access to getting into serving a niche than ever before. So businesses in a centralized space are feeling that there are upstarts everywhere. And initially, they don't do a lot. They don't have huge market share, they don't sharpen graphs, but when you add them all up together, they start to be significant nibblers around the edge. And it's difficult when you're in a centralized place because it takes years for you to get that market share graph that tells you the names of the people that have been nibbling away at what it is that you're doing. Everyone knows you, but you don't know them. Then the value equation is very interesting because the value that people see is that when you are a monolith, in order to get there, you have to make sacrifices as to what it is that you can and can't do. And when other people provide more smaller, customized services, they often are able to provide value a lot quicker. So what's to be done for this? What's to be done for this? Because we know that these are the things that we're facing. But I want to tell you a story about something that is amazing. Most of our current economic order is being made by people who start something. So again, maybe I'm going to pick on this side as a Silicon Valley types. Something about you says tech, I'm not sure what it is. And those Silicon Valley types are familiar with the lone founder model. There's always a Bill Gates, there's a Jeff Bezos, whoever they may be. And this is not a uniquely tech phenomenon. As early as the 1800s, we still know one name. There's a Rockefeller, there is a Sam Walton, there is a lone founder which begins something, grows something, scales something. And it's been that way for at least 200 years. The Industrial Revolution ushers this thing in. But this top-down structure is the structure that we're saying is being shaken. The taller you are, the more centralized you are, the more vulnerable you are to feeling as though you're in these economic headwinds. So, in its conception, in its beginning, there's always one guy, and that one guy is at the top, and he builds a structure beneath him. And then that business goes to market. However, there are a number of things now that we've seen. And the things that are providing the most disruption are things that are being built primarily from the ground up. The people who are making money, are enabling people, like in our comments example, not to write to one editor, but to completely decentralize and democratize the ability to comment. Now what's happening is that businesses are scrambling because when I could define the narrative, I need to line up with this narrative of 1 million comments, as opposed to me defining the narrative through one piece of communication. And this ground up thing is not something that we like at all. It's not a function of size. I do a lot of work in the tourism industry. I can tell you that B&Bs don't like TripAdvisor. They've got 10 rooms. They hate the fact that people can come in and go, look, the breakfast was undercooked, the linen wasn't clean enough, the view wasn't great, I think they should do better with their wine selection. Nobody is enjoying this thing. Small business, 8 rooms, don't like the fact that commentary is now completely decentralized. There was a time when only Michelin-starred people had the right to come and tell you how good you were. Now, every single person can do so. It's a vexing, vexing thing. And right up to the biggest companies in the country, they have the same complaint. Competition has been interesting because competition has been great because everyone has seen this model, get founder, build something, scale something, and they've been doing the same thing. Now, a lot of people are going, sure, I hope we get a great founder. It's kind of a lottery. Life, ifana nama dice. We get what we get. And then finally, one of the things that we've seen in innovation is the fact that it's become very tech-leaning. It's an interesting thing because even technology is there to serve people. And our paradigm towards technology is not something that I feel is holistic. So let's take a look at something that's been there before the Industrial Revolution. Something that will be there after this and other revolutions. And let's see what this thing could teach us. And by this thing, of course, I'm referring to the emergence of sport. Sport is a very interesting thing. It's very interesting how sport comes up because in the literature, you'll find that they refer to the emergence of sport as spontaneous order. It's an interesting term. It's the exact opposite to this lone founder starting something, building something, because that speaks to an intentionality that we all crave. But apparently, sport didn't start that way. So I'm going to pick on football because, I'm still dealing with the post-traumatic stress disorder of running out of time yesterday. So you'll forgive me for being brief. But I'm going to use just football as an analogy. If you look at the Middle Ages, you'll see that there's a game that's played by two groups, and they would kick a ball or a dead animal, between themselves from here to there. Of course, to call it a sport is euphemistic. It was basically a riot. But it was a riot, that had no purpose. There was no service delivery things. Things were good. Everyone was doing their thing, but, they felt like, a good riot was in order. So, picked up a ball and away they went. In fact, if you go to the city of Florence, they've still got a medieval game. I think it's called a calcio. Forgive me if I've pronounced that incorrectly. And it really is a riot just between two groups, and it takes the whole day, and no one knows where the ball is, but sometime there's a ball that arrives elsewhere, other people celebrate, and that's been done. And that's what it looks like in the Middle Ages. As things happen, people want to play each other. And the problem was, when you want to play each other, you need a uniform set of rules. You can't just play each other when other people arrive. Others have got bats, others have got rackets, others have got balls, others will carry it, others will kick it. All of a sudden, that'll turn into a very real riot, which, won't be enjoyed. So what happened was people then started playing each other. And in needing to play each other, they needed to set up a uniform set of rules. So they would get together and go, right, here's what we'll do. We'll limit it. You bring 10, I bring 10. I'll bring the ball, we'll meet there. And they would do something. And other people would go, okay, you bring 3, you bring 3, you bring the wooden rack, and so it continued. And in a ground-up way, free from any centralized power, people were making social contracts. And they were doing so not because there was this big financial incentive. They were doing so because they wanted the ability to test themselves against others. And so by the time that you look at the 1800s, you see that these rules were more widely adopted by some than others. So you'll see that, for example, the rugby school was a very famous case of those rules being adopted. Rugby is in fact a school in England, and it's where we're told William Webb picked up the ball for the first time and ran with it, not using his feet. And by doing that, and by the adoption of other people of those rules, going, it's a nice game, we like it. We're not sure what he's doing, but, we'll go with it. Can we see you next Thursday and do the same thing? Rugby as a sport was born. Yep. It's literally named after that school. In order for that school to play against other schools, one of the things that they needed to do was to establish the rules. And those rules were, You can handle the ball. Association football is different. They decided nobody is handling the ball. In fact, we're going to outlaw it. We will punish you if you do that. And association football comes from the idea that people got together and they said, we will associate ourselves around these rules. That's why every soccer body has got an association in it. In England, it's called the FA, Football Association. What was the association? The association was, we are associating ourselves amongst these rules. Different now to the rules of rugby, which was developing by itself. You know what I mean? School to school from that part of the world. What's very interesting about this, these associations, the FA, SAFA, FIFA, everything with an R in soccer, should remind you from now on that these R's are voluntary. Voluntary. Associations that were done by people in order to play each other. You following me so far? No founder, no scaling, not top down, but ground up. Now what happened is, two things take place. We've got competition. Competition now is around the handlers, which is rugby, and the kickers, which is football or soccer. You know, depends how you want to play that. But now, all of a sudden, we're seeing that there's competition. This competition amongst codes is a very important thing. And it's an important thing because we want, what is it? Attention. You know, so if nobody is looking at my hybrid game of badminton meets netball, I have no one's attention. There's no relevance for those people, and therefore there's no value. But for the sports that are showing those three things, all of a sudden they have this pent-up value that they're not going to monetize just yet, but it's already there because people are there and they're relevant. It's entertaining, it's got health benefits, they feel good, they love competition. All of those wonderful benefits are being organized. So, looking at just one man who revolutionized rugby in the US, he was the football coach at Yale University, and he made a number of innovations, changed a number of things to make it more relevant to the people in the northeastern starboard of the United States, and the NFL was born. It's an interesting thing, because when we think innovation, we think of somebody coding in the bedroom somewhere, or somebody with a lone laptop who's about to unleash an app. But sport shows us evidence of innovation taking place over thousands of years, discerning what the offside rule should be, what the stadia should look like, who should play, who should not. All of these things gaining ever more attention, ever more relevance, ever more value. I'm not sure if you've had the pleasure, but if you watch one of these big sporting derbies, and I don't want to get into any of the sports, but one of the things that you'll find is fervor amongst men the way that you will never see. I heard a confession yesterday, very briefly, from Vusi Tembegwayo. He was telling me about the fact that he never once wanted to be seen as a Zulu man crying in front of a Xhosa one. The funny thing is that the minute you put them into stadiums and somebody scores 2 goals, the tears flow freely. I've been to the most homophobic places the world has ever seen, and I've seen men hug each other in such an emotional and intimate embrace that I wonder what it is about this thing that suspends the way they see these actions. It is deeply, deeply embedded into the fiber of everything human, and they will demonstrate that fervor in ways that are difficult to find elsewhere. Show of hands, please. Any one of you in your businesses and your corporates exceeded your financial targets, and there was an open-top bus that was hired for you, and you were driven down the streets of Sandton, and there were throngs of people, just the left and to the right, just, going, you know what, woo, KPIs, just, stretch target, No, anyone? Anyone? No, no, not. What is it about this thing? In fact, people with KPIs and stretch targets ditch work, right? And they go out into the streets of Sandton and they go and cheer voluntarily, willingly, at great risk of peril back at the office. My job will be suspended. My income will stop. I'll see my boss later. Now, we're going to... Wait a minute. It's a curious thing. It's a curious thing. I work with companies with some of the largest budgets in the world for marketing. Calculated plans, agencies, strategists, plans, all of these things to try and get something which people are achieving for a minuscule amount. It's a curious thing. It's a curious thing. Bank Santander, for example, as big as their budget is, they would never be able to muster the same kind of passion and emotion of an El Clasico. It just doesn't happen. It's an interesting thing. What is it about that? What is it about that voluntary, willing, passionate fervor that drives that part of society that we so desperately crave in business that just seems to be so far apart? It's an interesting thing, right? Because, a great income statement is where people are like, listen, I'm going to show you fervor, I passionately crave it, whatever it is. So Apple is a great example. People who earn incredible amounts of money are going to sleep on the floor. They make $350,000 a year, and they're like, look, I'm grabbing my sleeping bag, I'm getting my coffee mug, I'm sleeping outside the Apple store, in San Jose. It's a weird thing. That's what makes the income statement look so great. Everything else then is just like, just don't make an error. And it's not difficult to pay attention to those numbers because it's just like, 1 trillion market cap. It's a very different thing. So one of these things about spontaneous order is instructive because it predates the dispensation we're in. And I'm pretty certain will postdate the dispensation we're in. And I think so is because if we want to be future fit, it might be important for us to place bets on the things that we know have endured throughout. Every financial state has had an incredibly strong sporting aspect to that society, an incredibly strong one. More powerful centralized authorities. I understand that businesses are powerful, but few things were as powerful as the Roman Empire. That thing was a central force. And yet, you can read emperors. What's interesting, of course, about Rome is that they had more than 1,000 years of, amazing ascendancy. When you read Roman history, they tell you about 5 good emperors. Sure, must have been a tough time. 1,000 years, 5 good guys. But however brutal that may have been or not, one of the things you find is that there's always time for the games. Rome is one of those empires that you didn't need to organize a World Cup because there were Colosseums already there. You could have literally just declared a FIFA World Cup in a year and everyone would have found their way to the Colosseum. It's just like 50,000-seater stadium. So my encouragement is that as we look in uncertain times, the things that are future fit, there's something in that enduring ability, that enduring thing around societal impact that sport has had that is instructive for us, for business. So, if this is true, if sport holds the key, if sport is this magical alchemy of sustainability, future fitness, and this passionate fervor where people will forsake things that are meaningful to them. And please bear in mind that the people in the streets have worked 15 years to assume the title of Chief Financial Officer. What they're leaving behind is not something they didn't want. It's something that's cost them 7 years of study, 5 years postgraduate study, 2 years of more advanced management, certificates. What they are saying is that it means a lot to me. And it is that meaning that I think is going to be the biggest shelter for businesses in uncertain times. So one of the things that we are doing now with our clients is we're saying we need to start urgently onboarding some of these traits. We may not have the entire elixir, but we have got parts of it that we need to start bringing into our businesses. And how do we do that? By starting internally and understanding this paradigm. Just the understanding for now is an important thing. We can already start to do things. And I'll get back to that in a second, because what is the most relevant first step that I think businesses can take is to open up new spaces for this type of ground-up innovation. It's a scary thing, right? It's a scary thing to open up a space and to let people associate around rules that they will draw up, around how they will enforce them. So the cricket people said, okay, we're going to have 2 people to enforce the rules because one, we can't have that. Soccer people said we'll only have 1. 1 referee, 2 umpires. So many of us in our corporate lives are so burdened by having to know what the right answer is. People look to us because we need to decide and we need to make a call. And those calls can be costly. One of the best insurances for the future that we see is the ability to open up a new space and to let people from the ground up associate. So I'm not saying risk your entire business on it, space, as big as it needs to be, to allow people to associate around your product, around your service. Maybe let them provide their own rules. I'm so interested to understand what that might look like because I have no idea. There's no way I could have predicted rugby. There's no way I could have predicted football. There's no way I could have predicted tennis, badminton, hockey, NFL. In fact, all American sports. What is basketball about, people? But that is where the magic is. And it relieves us of the pressure of being able to make these highly clairvoyant, prophetic calls that we need to make in order to function in the future. So the third thing that sport does is that it has always been so human-centric, so appealing to the people that are coming to the games, that are coming to practice, that are coming to play, that are willingly associating themselves, that it puts people back in the driving force of our economic revolutions. See, what gets lost in tech is that technology is still serving a human need. When there are magical sensors that do amazing robotic things, that leverage artificial intelligence while deploying machine learning patterns in order to give you radical efficiency, something is still being made, conceived by someone, in order to be given to somebody else. We need more things, better understanding of the things that are made and we need to make in order for this revolution to serve us the way that we hope it will. And sport is an amazing analogy of how you can bring innovation that is people-centered into the space. Because when you open up the space and you allow them, from a ground-up place, not controlled, not commanded, to associate amongst rules, what then starts to happen is that patterns start to emerge that you'll be able to commercialize later. Yeah? Sport was an amateur endeavor for the longest time. Yeah. The commercialization came later once the value was tangible. It's a wonderful model, right? Open up a space, let people do their thing, let them organize themselves. When they've organized themselves, arrive and build a financial model. It's a wonderful thing. Not sure about you guys, but I like that. This ability to be clairvoyant is something that is really not working well for me. So this is what I want to get across. about, in this space, at this time, how I think that businesses can start going faster, start being stronger, and start to aim higher. And I know that that's the Olympic motto. And I know that it's got wonderful Usain Bolt, high jump, javelin, all of these athletic connotations to it. But I purposely steered beyond those because our Olympics is in the field of business. In order for, I assume, or at least I hope, that you've seen all of these graphs which tell you about the rate of adoption. They tell you that it took, radio 95 years to get to 20 million users, and TV 100 years to get to 100 users, and Facebook got to 1 billion in 10 years or something like that. It shows you a rate of adoption. It says to you things have been going faster and faster. It also shows you about user adoption. But it also shows you a tale about how those things slow down. At some point, we run out of users. There just aren't any more people. And so one of the things that we need to do better is, how do we do that faster? How do we do that faster? I think the answer to that lies in the open innovation space where people can associate themselves from the ground up. I think you'll get there far quicker than trying to nail that in a bosbarat. The stronger is about the fact that in a decentralized democratic world, you're no longer going to be able to force people to do something. There was a time when an electricity utility could force you to do whatever because they were your only chance at power. Today, if they were to force you to do something, generate it yourself and carry on like nothing happened. So people must have a willingness. They must voluntarily want to associate with your business and your product and your service. And I think that the ability to define it myself, to define it with my community, to define it with my friends, to define it with the strangers that I know nothing about, except that we like many goals, brings a buy-in that presents that strong tie. I think that's why people cry. And then the higher for me is about the purpose. It's about the fact that we have to go from me to we. Not only in an operational model point of view, but also in making sure that we can democratize those benefits. While the likes of Facebook and Twitter also give you the ability to comment, they also give you the ability to put up a small store. They give you the ability to talk about your products and services. The benefits that we need to keep giving out are greater today than they've ever been before. For two reasons. One, never has it been such a wonderful time to live on earth. Never have we been this rich. But for some, it's just as desperate as it's always been. And so one of the things that we need to do is we need to eradicate this unequal world. So with that, I wanted to make sure that you got everything that was promised. And I mean, by promise, I mean that you were promised the Latin part of the title. And that is Citius Altius Fortis. If we are able to learn from this enduring human pattern, this enduring human truth, forsake our perhaps too egocentric view about how to order the world, and accept that we can bring into our world a spontaneous order that can propel us forward, I think we'll be future fit and better equipped to face what's coming in the business world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mqondisi.